even if Joseph doesn't have the dream himself, he has the judgment to connect this dream, the content of this dream, with this concept. So in fact, that's what makes him a prophet. Welcome back, or welcome to the episode. This is part 2 of our series on prophecy. But today's episode is a little different. We're going to be kind of taking a step back out of prophecy and talking about the basis for the philosophical basis for how prophecy works. So we're going to be talking about the powers of the soul in this classic sense and how Thomas would have understood them. If you're familiar at all with these topics, you might find the treatment inadequate or too brief, but I'm really just trying to do a flyover, very high overview and a very quick overview of the powers of the soul, that we have some grounding when we move into the next part, which is where we'll get into the meat and potatoes. So my hope is that this introduction to Thomas's conception of the various powers of the soul, and especially the imagination, will help us understand and see how Thomas describes the imagination as the kind of vehicle, the par excellence vehicle of prophetic vision. So with that said, let's jump in. So knowledge begins first and foremost in the exterior senses. So we kind of know what these are. They're the 5 senses: our sight, our hearing, taste, touch. And what these give us is a particular type of knowledge, the scholastics will say. So it gives us a particular knowledge. That is to say that we know this particular cup, we know this particular tree, this particular dog. We don't know dogness yet or treeness, just this one particular thing. And the exterior senses are considered passive because they're acted on. That sight receives its proper object, your ears receive sound, and this is something that is impressed upon them. So you get what he calls an impressed species is formed by your senses acting on you, or your passive senses receiving information. So the exterior senses receive sensible information. But from there, we can move into the interior senses. So the interior senses, and this is important, are called the material part of the intellect. So while it's true your imagination might not be a physical part of your brain exactly, or I should say, the images in your, they're not physical, but it's clear that your imagination and the other powers, your memory, do use some physical part of your body. Usually they refer to it as, the organ, which we would understand today as the brain. And for far as primitive as the psychology might seem when we read Thomas, they were, the medievals and the ancients were great observers of human nature. So it was clear that some men, or some people they knew, had a disease or a head injury or something, and their memory wasn't quite the same. Or like there was something happened, and their brain didn't function right. So they knew that there had to be some connection between some organ in the body and the functioning of the soul. So again, just to sum up that point, the meaning is that these powers of the soul can be affected by material causes. So lack of oxygen, bad diet, damage will actually impact these powers. So there's 4 interior senses: the common sense power, memory, imagination, and the cognitive. Not the cognitive, but the cognitive. We're not going to go over all of them, just the important ones. So, well, they're all important, but pertinent, I should say, to the topic at hand. The related ones. Yes, the related ones. So the common sense power. So this is the proper function of the common sense power is to unify the various senses that came in. So your sight, your hearing again. So you see a cup of coffee, but you don't just see it. Perhaps you taste it. Perhaps you smell it. Perhaps you feel it. But these aren't separate moments. That's not how we experience them. what the common sense does is it brings all the senses together and gives you one unified impression. And then from there, it goes to your memory and imagination. So it unifies the various senses into one phantasm, really, one unit. And then from there, we can actually have some sort of understanding of the particulars of various pieces as they all come together. So the perceptions, the external perceptions that we have, are limited to what is present in space and time. So I don't have a sense experience of yesterday, and I don't have a sense experience of tomorrow. I might have an image, but I'm not currently sensing with my eyes yesterday or tomorrow. So the power that is responsible for this is the imagination. The power that allows us to form an image of what is absent or distant from the external senses, something that's remote or even non-existent. The imagination can make that present. So the imagination is fed by sense impressions. So from the senses, the imagination forms by selecting and separating different colors, by combining different things, and into making them into some sort of pattern. Again, it doesn't unify the image in the same way as a common sense, but it does create a picture from what's been fed from the outside. So it's the nature of the imagination to present what is remote in space and time. The imagination can be, and it can do this by the will, you can will to create a new image. And we see this obviously in waking states, you can do this, but then it's interesting in sleep, it seems like you have these kind of flashes of images that come to your head. So there seems to be something about the imagination that is under the control of the will, but then at times not in the control of the will. I think everyone has the experience of just like a sudden image that comes to your head, perhaps even against your own will, an image will come to your head. And this kind of gives it the idea that there's a spontaneous character to the imagination, which of course the great depth psychologists, Carl Jung and such, will talk about, that images seem to come up from the deep. They're very unconscious, and they seem to, again, work even against your best, your best wishes and your strongest will. And what might be surprising for us as moderns is how Thomas attributes a lot of this image/phantasm to biological or biochemical factors, because he says that these images can have an impact on our bodily health and even disease. Our bodily health and disease can have an impact on the imagination, rather. And it kind of goes to show this psychosomatic union that even someone in the medieval period may have understood.
It wasn't, in fact, the Dark Ages.
Yeah, right. I think even if some of the conclusions may not have always been correct, they were still great observers of human nature and just nature in general. So he understands that there's something going on in the interaction of the imagination and the imaginal and the material world. So the imagination is, again, it's part of the material faculties of the senses. And one reason why I want to kind of continually stress that is, again, not only that your body can impact the imagination, but Thomas will assert very strongly that revelation is mediated by angels or through angels. And angels, I think we like to think of it, have like kind of complete access to our bodily or our existence, our complete existence. But technically, they only have access to the material part of you. And the imagination being a material part of you, they can influence that. So God can communicate spirit to spirit because he's pure spirit. But he'll communicate that through angels to our imaginations. So this material part of us, this imagination, again, receives the information from outside, from our outside senses, and creates this sense image. Now we can make a division in our imagination, I guess. There is the retentive imagination and the creative imagination. So retentive is just the image that we have perceived in the past. We saw that cup of coffee. We now have an image of it. It's stored in our memory, but when we pull it out of our memory, that's the image that we have still. But then there's the creative part, which we can actually invent things with our imagination. Again, perhaps things that don't even exist. We can imagine tomorrow, but not only tomorrow, but perhaps 2,000 years in the future. That the imagination is that creative part of us is what's really responsible for artistic endeavors or even inventions. Really, can you imagine something that doesn't exist yet? Could you how would that function?
I think that that aspect of imagination is what is commonly understood as imagination, is the think a thing that doesn't exist, as opposed to like the center of your mind that creates images. Like obviously the word imagination just is like imagination. So it's like the imagizing of the senses. And so it's like the powerhouse in which you create images, and then they separate the two things. It's like you have images of actual things in reality, and then the artistic side of like creating things that don't exist, but they're still in this area called the imagination.
Yeah.
I think that's just important to like emphasize that when we're talking about the imagination, it's not like this is the fake world. It's like, no, this is the sense data interpretation into an image. And then there's also the creative aspect of that where you do things that haven't existed yet. And it's all the same thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. When you say use your imagination, it's like, okay, so
a fake thing.
Yeah, right. Create a fantasy.
Right.
That's because of Disney, I think. The Imagineers, right? Is that what they're called?
Yeah.
Whatever, the people who are responsible for creating things there. But no, I think you're right. It's just, imagine this cup of coffee. It's like, well, it's not that it doesn't exist. It's like you've had, a cup of coffee. You know what it looks like. That's just the kind of like bare bones of it. And then there is this other side. But the interesting thing about the imagination is, as it relates to the other powers of the soul, is that it's actually even fundamental just to have continual knowledge. And if you really examine what it is, when you recall something, when you've learned something, you use your imagination as a part of that process. For some people it's more powerful. What is it? Like photographic memory. It's like you can see exactly on the page where you read it, or even the environment in which you studied. I had professors recommend that always study in the same place, so that you can kind of recall that spot.
That would actually be more like a recall of the like common sense of like you're getting, as the photographic memory is like I'm recalling what I see with my eyes, versus like you can still recall things, but it may not be photographical. And so like you imagine, like it's important to study in the same place, because when you recall, it's going to be the total experience as opposed to just the sight.
Yeah, right.
Like like you're like leaning into the powers of the imagination to recall all the types of sense data.
Right. It's I was sitting in this place, this time, this was here, this table was here, this book was here. So yeah, it's not just the page. You're right. It's supposed to be kind of a more holistic, I guess.
The smells.
Yeah. The smells,
the
what were you drinking?
Yeah, exactly.
I also have heard that even in like drink if you can the same thing, because you can kind of remember the taste and everything. But so that goes into the idea that dispositions of your bodily existence can impact the right functioning of your interior senses. So it's the imagination's relationship to memory and will is that its relationship to memory is that when we really do think about, again, the cup of coffee, what that really is something that's been stored in our memory, and then the imagination kind of reaches into the memory and pulls that out and recalls that precise thing. So there's this kind of back and forth between creating the new image, recalling the new image, playing with the image, but then also that image is stored in the is stored in the memory, kind of as it was perceived then. But then it's kind of odd because you can pull out that image, toy with it, and then put it back.
Right.
And the image that's now in the memory is a different image that was there before. Yeah. Of course, this is all, it's so hard to talk about these things because it's all...
imaginal?
It's physical language.
Yeah, right.
I think Vervaeke talked about that one time. He was like, think of a lion. He was like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like, what is the exact process by which you retrieved the image of a lion? Right. Like, can you give me a step-by-step?
Even, the language, you're saying step-by-step, retrieve, pull it out, toy with it, put it back. Like, actually, this is like getting really meta because the only way we communicate is through these physical like metaphors of images in our head. And so it's all just like image on image on image that really just goes into, it really touches on like epistemology of like how we come to know things. It's through these images, and then we recall them, and then we try to explain things through images, and then you stand under to understand, and you grasp an idea. And
that fits in with the broader conversation that we're trying to have about prophecy. It's like, why is it symbolic and imaginal?
Right.
Why does God say, I am like this, and uses a symbol or something, as opposed to just giving a metaphysical discourse to the prophet? It's like, because we understand the invisible through the visible, so I'm going to say I'm like a husband to you, or, you are like a dirty rag to me. It's because I can't talk, I can't reveal to you these, purely spiritual, disembodied truths or something, Right. But anyway, you're right. That's this whole idea of even, stored in the memory. Yeah, it's all so trippy. But interestingly, also, the imagination, if we think about it, has a relationship to our instincts. So, both animals and ourselves, we can be kind of moved unconsciously by something. We see something and then we just immediately react, and we're not entirely sure why. And at least the medieval account is that it has a relationship. What you see has a relationship to a previous memory, an image. And so you're reacting before you can even recall that image. So there's a passion that kind of precedes your imagination as something kind of stored and remembered in your body, that when you see, I'm trying to think of an example, because everything I'm thinking of is kind of obvious. Like, why would you jump at a spider? It's like,
right.
Well, it's kind of obvious, right?
Scary insect.
Yeah, the scary insect. But nonetheless, there's something that, again, it seems that the memory and the imagination are working together, that now have not just had an existence in your brain, I guess, but an existence even in your instincts, like your sub-rational, like appetites, your anger or
why
fear.
like why would you pull your hand from a hot stove? Because
Sure.
like why is that sensation known as hot and painful? It's like there's an instinctual memory, you could call it, that the body is recalling, saying like that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Move back, whatever.
Right.
So it's conscious.
Yes, yeah, that's a great way to describe it. So the speaking of the appetites and the will, well, I can add that in there. They're considered blind faculties. So what that means is they're incapable of movement without an object. So they move towards an object because there's this idea that they can possess the object. So the appetites are moved, we could say, by an image, by the imagination, and in fact, principally so. So, if you're hungry, you kind of, at least maybe even subconsciously, at least, imagine food. That there's an object that will satisfy it. What is that object? And you have to imagine that. Even the idea of, well, who do you want to be? Like, what do you want to become? It's like, well, you have to really think about that and create a picture, because that picture will have a great emotive power. It has a motivational power of like, who is it that you want to be? And then your will can move you in that direction. So the proper object really of our, we call them appetites, but that's essentially your passions, is the image that we have in our imaginations. That's principally what moves you. So the capacity to move the appetites makes the imagination this kind of pivotal faculty in relation to kind of all these other faculties. So since the imagination obeys reason is able to kind of affect or move the appetites by means of the image. So this means that the appetites actually are taught and trained and ordered really by the imagination. So if you have disordered desires, you should ask, what image do you have in your mind? That actually it seems like the imagination has an incredible moral force to it. The images that you have stored in your mind kind of help, I think, very unconsciously shape your moral character and your desires. I think that's one of the, in my personal opinion, I think it's one of the great arguments for images and icons and sacred art and sacred music and everything like that is, I think it has a real ability to give us an object of desire, a holy object of desire. So whenever I see, Catholic parents have their kids dress up as saints and everything, I'm like, that's not a bad idea. I think when I was younger, I was like, yeah, that's so cringe. Uh-huh. But you do kind of have to put on the saint. And by doing that, you kind of imagine that you are that person. And, of course, you want to move from, imagination to being that person. But it's a good first step to just start training your imagination to think of holy and good things. That's St. Paul's advice. Think of what's above. And by slowly doing that, you'll move in that direction. So Thomas makes two observations about kind of how strong the imagination can be, what kind of effect it can have on our existence. And he says that the body is moved by the imagination insofar as the imagination has this sort of this innate principle within us to again give us a desire for an object. So when he says that the imagination moves us, what he's saying is that the will moves the body, it's kind of but it's mediated by the imagination. It's ultimately you choose something because you will to do that thing. But kind of prior to that willing, perhaps there's an image that then moves you. It's what are you going to do later today? You have an image of that, and then the will moves towards that image. Not only that, but the imagination, as we've kind of touched on, has ability to cause a dispositional change in the person. So certain images cause certain bodily changes, essentially. So whatever image you have in your mind can actually, he wouldn't say this, Thomas wouldn't say this, but as we know, maybe create a chemical disposition. And I think this was part of perhaps Peterson's great influence in the past. Was part of your depression is that you have this terrible image of yourself. You have this terrible image of life. It's well, what if you created a better image for yourself? What if you did do what you could do? I really do think, again, in their own medieval way, they were really onto something about this idea that images do in fact have a biochemical relationship. I don't have the exact science on me, but I feel like everything that we've been learning about depression over the last 5 years seems to confirm that. At
the very least, it really is just the hylomorphic principle that we are corporeal.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to find some chemical imbalance or chemical reaction to being angry, that doesn't disprove the spiritual component of anger. It just means that it participates in it.
Yeah.
They don't have to be these complete dichotomies.
Right. And I think we'll see that all throughout this, and then hopefully in prophecy, is as spiritual as prophecy can be, and as spiritual as some of this stuff is, it's always through material. Like there's a great union of body and soul and material and immaterial, that one will impact the other. And I think to ignore that or to try to separate that is a flight into unreality. It's a Gnostic unreality. But so, I guess by a little way of summary that we've been talking about, the imagination has this, or the imagination is naturally ordered towards moving us. So it moves us to certain actions. It moves our interior. It moves our, it'll have an impact on our intellect. It says it changes us biochemically. So I want to touch on, because this will be important for prophecy, the idea of forming a new image in the imagination. How does that come about? And I guess the process behind that, because we talked a little bit about the creative part of the imagination, but it's not just that our imagination has previously stored images or has images of things that we've seen before, but that it has this great creative power as well. So the human person for the medieval is a hierarchy, internal hierarchy. So you have your passions below, which are not rational, and then you have these internal senses we've been talking about that are kind of mixed, material, immaterial, and then you have your higher intellect, as they'll call them, your agent intellect and your possible intellect. And so the higher moves the lower. That's how they see it. Is the possible intellect can move the lower, while the lower can impact the higher. It can never directly move them. There's nothing that can. There's no way. I guess a passion could truly overcome your will. In the end, if you will something, even if you are very incapacitated, perhaps you could say, through whatever means or such, you still choose it, kind of at the very bottom. So that's the basis for what we're about to get into. So the possible intellect, the highest part of man, is the formal cause, the main cause of a new image. Again, your images are created through senses, memory, and all these other powers, but it's principally the possible intellect that will go into your imagination and say, okay, let's combine these parts. Let's make a new image from something previously experienced. We'll add this together, add that together, and create, something new. We'll add, a horse and wings. And we'll get a Pegasus, You
can actually really start to see the whole microcosm, macrocosm, like mind of the medievals in that, like, this is heaven and earth, essentially. That, like, the higher parts of you control the lower, and it's in the higher that things are created. Let us make X in our image, right? And so it's like you're seeing a little, like, microcosm play out. I'm, like, literally seeing Genesis 1 in your notes of, like, you take these things and you take dirt and you breathe life into it, and that's how you get all the things.
Yeah,
it's microcosm.
You have in man essentially all the parts of the universe, if you want to say. Like, you have, again, your passions, which are purely bodily. But then you have this interior sense, again, the imagination, that's kind of bodily, kind of not. And then you have the highest part of your intellect, which is immaterial. Right. It's dependent, you're still a human, but it's just, again, the idea that it can't be precisely influenced by anything material. So yeah, I think we've talked about it before, but St. Bonaventure's idea of the hierarchy of the soul, someone who is truly divinized, someone who is at peace with themselves, is someone who has all those in order. That the higher controls the lower obeys the higher. Until then, we're kind of at war. St. Paul says that the law and his members. It's like I don't do what I want to do, and such, is because of this disordered hierarchy. So again, the possible intellect is combining two things or dividing them, whatever it may be, to create something new. So Thomas uses the example of a mountain of gold. It's like, well, you have gold, you've seen that. You've seen a mountain, put them together. Well, now you have a new image of a mountain of gold. So the possible intellect can move the intellect or move the imagination to reformulate images, create new ones, again, divide them. Just you can rearrange them in any sort of way. As one, you could rearrange letters to create a new word, and rearrange them again, maybe to create the original word or a third word altogether, whatever it is. That's kind of how the possible intellect works on the imagination. So what it means to come to an understanding of something better, it often means that we're modifying the image that we abstract from the matter. And by doing that, we come to a truer understanding or a better understanding that the thing, or perhaps a true understanding which conforms with reality. We might have been mistaken about the coffee cup or the tree or whatever, but by going back into the memory, we can, in a memory in the imagination, we can reproduce an image that is more correct with reality. So it's not that we rewrite reality or anything like that, but that we're working with the image that we have of a true thing and making it more in line with reality. So we talked a little bit about possible intellect just now. So we'll get into now the higher parts of our soul. So this is the agent intellect, the possible intellect. So the agent intellect is an immaterial faculty, and its primary function is to abstract the concept out of the imagination. So again, the imagination and the other interior senses have particular knowledge. I have knowledge of this coffee cup and this coffee cup alone. But what the agent intellect does is it abstracts out of it coffee cup. Like now you know coffee cup.
General coffee cup.
Right. If someone asks, what is a coffee cup? That's what you're thinking. Again, you might refer to that one particular, but you do know generally the essence of what a coffee cup is, or the essence of a dog or a tree. So it draws out the intelligible form of that. What it then does is it gives that to the possible intellect. It impresses the essence into the possible intellect. So it receives the intelligible species, and now your mind has truly universal and immaterial knowledge. So the medievals will say that true knowledge is immaterial knowledge. So that's to say that not the particular coffee cup as it is material, but the universal coffee cup, the immaterial knowledge of it. Because what the essence of something is immaterial. It's inside, it's inside the coffee cup, but the essence of it will be something, again, not bound to that one particular coffee cup. So the possible intellect has several acts. This is very important for prophecy. So I'm not just going off on some random stuff here. This is very important. So the two acts that we'll want to cover are understanding and then judgment. Both of these happen at the same time. They're usually act 1, act 2, but that's just by division. They happen simultaneously. So the first act, understanding. So understanding is the act of the possible intellect by which it apprehends the essence of a thing. So you pull out the concept, or you pull out the essence, grasp it, I understand what it is. So it's the first level of our intellectual knowledge. Thomas makes an interesting point. He says to understand is intellectus is broken up into two Latin words, to intuus and legere, so to read into. So the act of understanding is you're reading into the object. You're reading into the interior essence of the thing. So that's what your higher intellect can do, is actually say, this is what a coffee cup is. This is what it means to be a coffee cup. The second act, very, very important for prophecy. If you're still with me, it's very important.
This is it right here.
This is it. So it's judgment. So judgment is a form of knowledge in which we know something by means of composition or division. So God's knowledge is simple. He doesn't know by combining concepts. He just knows. We don't. We have to combine concepts. So an example of this is we have a concept of health and we have a concept of food independently. But we're able to compose that and understand healthy food. That's our form of judgment is now we could also divide them, but in this one we're placing them together, and judgment helps us gain a further knowledge of the thing than just understanding in the first act. So it helps us to know differences and similarities. So we can say that in some way house cats are like lions. They're both feline, So there can be no apprehension of truth, really, without this act of judgment. We can't know truth and falsehood, or whether we have a true vision or we're hallucinating. We need judgment. So what this means is that unless an image or an idea is related to something else, it has no meaning or significance for us. And if we don't understand health, and someone says, this is healthy food, so what does that mean? It has to be connected to something else. So if it has no meaning or significance, if it's not then the sign of the symbol then is not significant to us. It tells us nothing. So again, if I hear the sound of a cat, if I have the sight of a cat, this is, or if I hear the sound of a cat, and I have an understanding of what a cat is. I mean, even what I'm saying, like if I hear a sound of a cat, I know what a cat is. Right. It's like if I hear a sound and I don't know what it is, then I have no reference point, and that can be, alarming. I'm thinking of the first time I heard of a fox scream. Absolutely terrifying. Yeah. Terrifying sound. It sounds like someone being murdered. It's really awful. And it's like, but I didn't know what it was. So, but even then, it's like you start trying to make connections immediately. Like again, it sounds like someone's being murdered, and like that's the only thing I can think of. But if I know fox and I know the sound of a fox, I can combine them together. So it's very important. I'll end, kind of by way of an example with prophecy that we'll get into about connecting judgment to prophecy. So an example that Thomas and a lot of the scholastics use for this is the idea of, or the example of Pharaoh and his dreams in Genesis. So Pharaoh and Joseph. It says that Pharaoh has dreams. They seem to be prophetic. They seem to have some sort of meaning to them, but he doesn't understand what they are. He has no judgment on them. He can't compose anything. This concept that he's receiving in the dream, he has no way to relate it to something else. However, Joseph can. Even if Joseph doesn't have the dream himself, he has the judgment to connect this dream, the content of this dream, with this concept. So in fact, that's what makes him a prophet, is that he's able to judge correctly the dream as it relates to the eternal designs of God.
So in that sense, the judgment is more important than the dream itself as a qualifier of like what makes a prophet. It's like it's really that discernment, the ability to connect the images, whatever they are, to the meaning.
Yes, exactly. And Thomas will say that having both is ideal, but judgment is better than reception, because you can have all kinds of dreams, and people I think do, and I don't think there's maybe I don't know how to say this, like low level supernatural dreams, like maybe they're not from God or something, but they have some significance, but there's no way to interpret them because they have no reference to anything else. So even though the immediate meaning may not be apparent, to Joseph it was, and for that he was able to help the Pharaoh, prepare for the coming famine, because he was able to again see it in light of a higher knowledge of God's eternal designs. So I tried to do that as fast as I could, do a quick overview. There's probably a lot of information. Again, when you read Thomas, sometimes it seems like archaic, strange, medieval psychology, but I think there's some real truth there, and I think it'll help us understand why Judgment and the imagination is so important for prophecy.